A woman in gray sweats steps into an elevator full of men in red. She is shorter than every one of them. Her hair is still tied back from the obstacle course. There's a ring of perspiration at her collar. None of them look at her directly, which is somehow worse than if they had. She stands in the middle of the frame, hands at her sides. The doors close. Before Jodie Foster's Clarice Starling speaks a single word in The Silence of the Lambs, Jonathan Demme's 1991 psychological thriller, that quick shot of her in the elevator has already defined her entire purpose. She's not a peer, but rather something to be placed. In a few minutes, this trainee gets sent across a glass wall to interview Anthony Hopkins' Hannibal Lecter, a man who has refused to speak to every investigator the Bureau has put in that chair for years. The film stages a question it never asks out loud. Why her? Why a trainee instead of a senior agent? Lecter won't talk to the men. Shilton bores him. Crawford annoys him. But a young woman with a soft Appalachian accent and a wound she hasn't closed yet, she gets through. Not because she's better than the men, but because she's shaped like a key. And that key, that's The Silence of the Lambs. Demme's film swept the Big Five at the 1992 Academy Awards, one of only 3 movies in history to win Best Picture, Best Director, Best Actor, Best Actress, and Best Adapted Screenplay in a single night. The cultural memory of the film is pretty simple. Young woman working in a male-dominated institution earns her place through sheer competence. But that reading is not the entire story. Demme's film, adapted by Ted Talley from the Thomas Harris novel, is doing something quieter underneath the manhunt. It's watching the Bureau decide what to do with a person it has figured out how to use. Clarice's competence is real. Her bravery is not a trick of the camera. She's exactly who she appears to be. A gifted trainee with a terrible childhood and an enormous amount of will. The argument is about what Crawford sees when he looks at her. He doesn't pull her out of Quantico because gender equity is overdue at the Bureau. He pulls her out because she has a door he can't open and she happens to fit the lock. Her vulnerability isn't a liability he tolerates. It's a tactic he deploys. The film opens with Clarice on a Quantico obstacle course. Sweats, ropes, mud, face flushed. A woman in the middle of an evaluation she doesn't control. An instructor pulls her off the course. Crawford wants to see her. She walks into his office still sweating. The walls are covered in photographs of dead women. Polaroids tiled across a corkboard. Watery dump sites. Ankles bound with rope. A right arm skinned from wrist to shoulder. Pinned at the low center like a punchline. A clipping with the headline. Bill skins 5th. Her eyes land on it. Crawford watches her eyes land on it. Then he slides a file across the desk and tells her she's going to Baltimore State Hospital to administer a psychological questionnaire. Routine behavioral science work. Academic. He does not mention Buffalo Bill. He does not mention that Hannibal Lecter has refused to speak to every investigator the Bureau has sent for the better part of a decade. He does not mention that her real job is to be interesting enough to a cannibal that he decides, for his own reasons, to open his mouth. She takes the file. That's the first irreversible decision in the movie, and she makes it inside a lie. Buffalo Bill is the visible pressure. Somewhere in the Midwest, James Gump is skinning women to build a suit, and Catherine Martin, a senator's daughter, is about to be the next one. The clock is loud. But the deeper architecture is in place before Catherine is ever taken. Crawford, Lecter, a trainee being handed a file she has not been told how to read. She thinks she's being given a test of her abilities. But the truth is, she's being given a test of her usefulness. Scott Glenn plays Crawford as something more interesting than a villain. A competent, morally invested man running a unit that needs a win, who has made a calculation. Lecter won't talk to the men. Shilton, the prison director, is a peacock Lecter openly despises. Crawford himself is too senior. The front door has been tried for years. So he opens a side door, sends a trainee, a specific kind. Young, sharp, junior, still carrying the accent she was told to lose. Someone Lecter will find interesting. Someone he can read in 30 seconds. On paper, it's a development assignment. In practice, it's a casting decision. Watch the texture of Crawford's behavior. He tells her this is a questionnaire. It isn't. He invokes her dead father, a small-town marshal killed on duty. At the moment, she officially becomes his. Your father would have been proud today. He waits until she's pinned her badge to deliver it. This isn't mentorship. That's a key turning in a lock. The funeral home in Clay County, West Virginia. Crawford walks in with Clarice, asks the local sheriff to step into a private room, and gestures at her, saying the details of a sex crime should stay between men. He uses her gender as the pretext to flatter the sheriff into cooperating. Later in the car, he admits it was a smokescreen. The tactic worked. He knew it would. Sexism doesn't stop when the Bureau promotes her. It gets smarter. His calculation isn't that Clarice will shrink from these moments. It's the opposite. He's picked her because she won't. She'll hold the room and keep moving. That endurance is part of why he chose her. Then the film does something even stranger. It makes Lecter look like the honest one. Watch the first interview. Chilton walks her down to the basement, leering the whole way, narrating what a pure psychopath Lecter is. He warns her not to pass anything through the bars. He's auditioning to be the man in the story. Then he leaves her at the cell. Lecter's already standing, watching her approach. He doesn't move when she introduces herself. He notes that her badge expires in a week, makes her admit she's a student. He sniffs the air and tells her he can't smell her, then takes another breath and names the skin cream she uses, the perfume she isn't wearing today. He hears the West Virginia in her voice and places her one generation from poor white trash. He looks at her and sees a good bag, cheap shoes, and he, of course, says it out loud. He's taking inventory, but doing it through language instead of a knife doesn't change the category. She tries to push the questionnaire. He berates her for the ham-handed segue and sends her away. Miggs in the next cell flicks semen into her hair as she leaves. Lecter calls her back, apologizes for the rudeness of his neighbor, then offers her a clue. Look deep within yourself, and sends her chasing a name. That particular move makes Lecter sympathetic. Next to Crawford's managed manipulation, the cannibal can almost feel like the only adult in the building not running an angle. That's the trick. Lecter is not her liberator. His interest in her is materialistic. He wants her childhood. He wants the lamb. He wants the thing inside her she has never told anyone, and he's willing to trade fragments about Buffalo Bill to get at it. The famous quid pro quo isn't a partnership. It's a transaction in which her currency is private pain, and his currency is a transfer to her room with a window. Crawford uses her. Lecter uses her. The difference between them is within the style and how they do it. When the case breaks, it does so because she lets two different men climb inside her head. One has a badge, the other has a muzzle. Neither leaves empty-handed. Jonathan Demme and his cinematographer Tak Fujimoto shoot all of this into the film at the level of the lens. The direct address camera is the move other essays on this film still don't fully sit with. When Lecter speaks, he speaks into us. When Chilton leers, he leers into us. When the entomologist flirts with Clarice in the Smithsonian basement, the flirt lands on our face. Demme refuses the polite over-the-shoulder framing that will let us watch her from a safe distance. He puts us in the position of the men looking at her. The male gaze Laura Mulvey named in 1975 turned from theory into point of view and then cuts to her looking back. Small in the frame, holding her face against something she can feel but can't fully see. The camera is never neutral in this film. It always belongs to someone. The elevator shot is one image. Clarice in muted gray, mid-frame, surrounded by a wall of taller men in matching red. No one in that elevator needs to say a word. The hierarchy is already doing the talking. The autopsy in the Potter funeral home does something similar, but in another register. White cream dabbed under everyone's nostrils to mask the smell. Rural deputies fill the edges of the room, carrying on while she works. The camera fragments the dead woman on the table into clinical close-ups while fragmenting Clarice into reaction shots among men who are watching her watch. She gets them to leave. Not by pulling rank, but by dropping her trained-out FBI register and letting the West Virginia back into her voice, telling them in her own cadence that the girl's family would appreciate everything they've done. And so, they go. Then, she finds it, reaches into the dead woman's throat with forceps, and pulls out a cocoon. Death's head moth. The first real break in the case surfaced by the only person in the room who could look at the body without flinching and could also be heard by the men standing in her way. 2 bodies are being examined in that room. Only one is on the slab. In our previous video, we tracked Travis Bickle, constructing an identity New York was happy to consume, and rewarding him for the performance. Different film, same machine, proving yet again that the institution doesn't need to understand the person in order to use them. This mechanism walks out of the theater and into how modern companies hire and promote. AFI's 2003 Heroes list placed Clarice Sterling at the top of its heroines, above every other female lead American film has produced. The deepest argument the movie makes is that she earned that ranking partly by surviving what her own institution did to her along the way. Consider the glass cliff. In 2005, in the British Journal of Management, Michelle Ryan and Alex Haslam named a recurring pattern in corporate leadership. Women and people of color get disproportionately elevated during periods of crisis. Not before, when the role is stable, but during, when the odds of failure are high and the reputational damage is already baked in. The board announces a historic first. The individual inherits a fire. If the fire gets put out, the company takes the credit. If it doesn't, the person elevated into the crisis becomes the face of the failure. Win-win. That's the same calculation Crawford made, just in a better suit. The modern institution doesn't always block women at the door. Sometimes it ushers them in just far enough to carry the risk. The smaller version of this lives an ordinary professional life. The woman on the team who gets asked to take notes in every meeting because she's so good at organizing. The only black colleague asked to weigh in on the diversity statement. These aren't gifts. They're transfers of labor performed in a register that makes refusal look ungrateful. Your specific identity makes you the right fit for the specific task. The task is framed as an honor. The honor produces value for someone else. The exchange gets called opportunity because the other word would make the room uncomfortable. So the most destabilizing thing about The Silence of the Lambs is the slow recognition that the FBI and the monster are running versions of the same play. One wears a badge, one wears a mask. Both have decided that Clarice Sterling is a resource whose particular shape unlocks a particular door. Both are correct. Both get what they came for. Clarice walks out of that basement having saved Catherine Martin, killed Buffalo Bill, earned the badge she trained for. The film doesn't take her victory away. When she stands at the graduation ceremony and Crawford tells her quietly that her father would be proud, the line is sincere, and it is also still a manipulation, and the film lets both of those things be true at the same time. She's brilliant, she solves the case, she's not just bait. But the door only opened in the first place because they knew she could get them what they wanted. That's why the film doesn't age into a girl boss thriller. It ages into a record of institutions that praise women while outsourcing the danger to them. Mentors who are also handlers. Predators more honest about what they want than the people who employ the heroine. Once you see it everywhere. The promotion with a crisis attached. The friendship with emotional labor attached. Jodie Foster won the Oscar for what she did inside that machine. The lambs in the title aren't only the ones Clarice couldn't save in Montana. The lambs are anyone called valuable right before they get used. Anyone told they were chosen when they were actually just being positioned. Anyone who mistook the open door for the end of the hunt. That's The Silence of the Lambs. Next month, the Prism is launching something new, a deep dive series. 45 minutes to an hour per film, same lens, more room. The first one is Heat, Michael Mann's 1995 crime epic. If this essay tracked institutions using people, the Heat deep dive tracks people who've stopped being able to tell where the work ends and the self begins. We will see you there, but in the meantime, I thank you so much for watching and your continued support. Until next time, please take care of yourself.